Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. If you just bought a new hand plane, congratulations. You're well on your way to enjoying a whole new level of woodworking. It doesn't come ready to use. The instructions usually don't give you everything you need to know, but I will. Stay with us. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new to our channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, which will alert you whenever we release a new video. Anytime we use a new tool or technique, we'll leave a description down below so that make it easier for you to find. All right, let's get back to work. Even the best hand planes are not optimized from the factory. And there's always going to be things that you can do to make them work just a little bit better. Sometimes it may only be a 1 or 2% improvement. But if you do that 4, 5, 6 times, that really adds up. And I know because I represented a premium hand plane line for 7 years. Worked with other companies that manufacture planes. And I've used them in my woodworking career for the last 40 some odd years. What you want is to be able to get your plane so that when you come to a piece of nice thick bird's eye maple, that you can produce that with very little effort. Little wax on the sole, and that should just carry off those shavings. Sub 1 thou, piece of cake. So that's what I'm going to do, is walk you through what I do with a new plane to get it to work like this. We're going to start with the unboxing, and this is a brand new 5.5 jack plane. It happens to be a Wood River, but what we're going to do would apply to any plane. Now they pack these with a fair bit of rust preventing oil. Get that out of the box. Now I'm going to take the pieces apart just to make it a little bit easier. Take the lever cap off. Take the blade and chip breaker out. And if you want to, you can take the frog out as well to clean that off. In fact, you know what, I may as well do that. I'll show you how. Just a couple of screws here in the back, the 2 outside ones. Loosen those. You don't have to take them all the way out. If you leave any of this oil in, then over time, the sawdust that just is a natural byproduct of planing mixes with that oil and it dries and clogs things up. These are the 2 frog retaining pins. There's the actual frog. Now what we'll do is go in here, clean all of that off. As long as your shop doesn't suffer extremes in temperature, you're probably okay to just take all this oil off and not worry about it. If you do have temperature changes, then you're going to want to do something to protect against rust. Easiest is probably to keep these in those silicone impregnated plane sacks. If you don't do that, then you're having to either use wax or oil, and that means wiping it on and off every time you get the plane out, put it away. Now take the frog, pardon me, the lever cap. I'm just going to take this screw out. Now you want to separate the chip breaker or the back iron, whatever you want to call it, from the blade. And although they don't come sharp ready to use, they do come sharp enough to cut yourself, so be aware of that. What I want to do right now is go through and just address some edges. So where the sole meets the side can be really sharp. And there's 2 things about that that I want to alter, or 2 reasons of that I want to alter that. One is if you accidentally bump against another piece of metal on the bench and you leave a ding on that side, it'll produce a bump on the bottom. Now you end up with a mark on your board when you're planing. Second thing is when it's really sharp like that and you're planing a wide panel, it almost wants to steer your plane. So you're planing with your plane angled like this, and as you're going across, it's wanting to guide it off in that direction. So what I do is I take a fine file, and the first thing I'm going to do is just cut a chamfer. So 45 degrees to the sole or to the side. I'm going to file away from the sole, just so that if there's a burr, it's on this side. And I'll just go toe to heel, and you're able to see what you're doing. So as you see that flat spot getting a little wider, that's probably about a 64th of an inch. Now what I'm going to do is angle that a little bit, so it's a much more acute angle that I'm filing at. And I'll do the same thing. Then I'm going to rotate it up a little bit. What I'm wanting to do is put a radius on this. A little bit more. A little bit more. And a little bit more. Now I'll do the same thing to this side. Heel and toe, same idea. So I'm just going to... This one I won't bother radiusing. I'm just going to cut a bit of a chamfer on there. Okay, makes it much easier and nicer to handle as well. Now just before we do the throat, I just want to go in here and make sure that the screws are tight. Okay, now when they cut the throat out, sometimes it leaves a bit of a burr, and it'll eventually wear off, but between now and the time that it wears off, it's going to leave marks on your board. So first I'm going to show you how to check for it. I'm just going to use my fingernail and just run it like that, and I can feel just a little bit of resistance. So there's 4 edges. This one's not important, meaning it doesn't matter what you do to get rid of it, but that's going to be different for the leading one. So I'm just going to come in here with my file. I'm going to go side to side on a bit of an angle to speed it up. Now when you're cutting like this, I purposely twist the chisel, the file just a little bit so that it cuts into that corner instead of giving you a smiley face. You want to keep that straight across there. Although it's not an important surface, it looks a little neater. And always be moving your file horizontally while you're doing this so you don't leave any divots. Now I'll just check that again. Don't feel anything. Then I'm going to check these ones out here on the edge. And there's just a little bit right there as well. So now you're going to want a file that has teeth on the sides. That one doesn't. So hold that on a bit of an angle. And I'll just get in there. That's all it takes. Double check it. Nothing. Now we'll check the front one. The reason why this one is so important is the way the plane functions. You have your blade coming along, and as it picks up the wood grain, as long as the grain is running in the direction you're planing, there's not an issue. But if you're dealing with figured wood and that grain changes direction, that blade's going to dig in and the fiber's going to want to lift up and tear. So that part of the sole of the plane, that edge right there, holds when the blade is moved close to it like that. That puts pressure on that wood fiber, holding it in place while it's cut and not allowing it to lift. So you want that surface, and when I say that surface, what I'm talking about is this surface right there to remain square to the sole. So, and it doesn't have to be perfectly 90 degrees, but you want it to be close. So first I'm going to check it. Actually, I don't feel anything at all on this one, but I'll show you how to do it just in case. And you may want to grab a Sharpie. Show you why. You can put this in the vise if you need to, or you can do it with one hand. Hold the file so that it's square to the sole, and just plane file while you're moving laterally. And you don't have to do a lot. You can stop and check. Now, if you remove all that paint, to make it easier to see where you're working, just go in with your Sharpie and paint that surface again. And that'll help you identify where your file is removing material. Go in and verify that there's no burr, and you're done. Okay, let's put the frog back in place. So that piece of steel goes into that little slot on that third middle screw, and that's what's going to move the frog forward and back. So when you put it in, make sure that that slips in there. If your plane is a bedrock style, get those pins with the divot pointing straight back. Now I like to keep my finger on there because as you tighten this screw up and it engages that pin, you'll feel it right itself. And then you know that it was properly aligned. Okay, we want to make sure that this is the lever cap, the lateral adjustment lever, and this is what's going to skew your blade to the right or to the left so that when it's projecting through the throat, it's parallel to the sole, so when you take a shaving, particularly on the edge of a board, you're taking the same amount off the left side as you are the right side. And sometimes that can be a little bit stiff, and I find all you have to do is just bend it up just a little bit right there at that point, and then bend it back down, and that usually all it takes to free it up. Blade is on the bottom. Chip breaker, back iron, cap iron is on the top. Now there's a gap between those two. That's intentional, so that all the pressure applied by the lever cap. So when you cock that, it puts pressure on the chip breaker because of the gap, and it's only contacting back here and right along the cutting edge. All that pressure is transferred out there on the cutting edge to help stabilize that blade and prevent it from chattering. So what we want is we want good contact between this surface, the underside of the lever cap, and the back side of the chip breaker. We want good contact between that leading edge of the chip breaker and the back side of the blade. So let's start with the first one and check it. The way I like to do it, I'm going to use the 300 grit side of this trend diamond plate just because it's aggressive, but I need to have it so that the opposite end of the lever cap is at approximately the same height, and I don't want to wear on this, so I'm going to use the underside of one of my trend diamond, my Shapton stones. This is just a piece of glass, and I'm going to set it up just like that. I'm going to leave it in the cocked position. I'm going to use 3 fingers to distribute the pressure evenly. Now, if you want, you can come in again with your Sharpie and paint that surface. It just makes it easier to see where you're making contact. Set that on there. 3 fingers to distribute the pressure. Just a few seconds. Turn it over and look. Okay, so we're making contact to within about 1/8 of an inch here. A little skip here, and within 1/8 of an inch over there. Now that would be fine. Because it was that close, I'll spend another few seconds fixing it. But what you want to avoid is having contact just on the outside corners. I saw this once. If it's slightly concave, all the pressure's on the outside corners. That puts all the pressure on the outside corners of the chip breaker. That puts all the pressure on the outside corners of the blade, and you're going to have a very difficult time preventing these plane tracks where the corners are digging in. So to fix it, just make sure it's nice and flat. So let's just see how many seconds it takes to amend that. All right, so we're within 1/16 of an inch over here and within maybe 1/8 of an inch over there, and I would suggest that there's no reason to do anything more to that. So we can set that aside and say that one is done for life, never have to touch it again. Okay, now let's run and do the chip breaker. So what we want to do is ensure that that leading edge is nice and flat, making full contact with the blade. And if you want, you can check it by just putting it in place and then holding up to the light, and you shouldn't see any light. And when I do that, I actually do. Now, it might be the back of the blade, It may be the chip breaker. We'll tackle them one at a time. So because that's a negative angle underneath there, I need to have the back side sitting lower than the front. And it just so happens that the blade gives you just about the perfect height difference. So I'm going to stay within 1/4 of an inch of this edge, because if you come over here too far, you're going to bump in this area. You don't want to do that. Another reason to come in here with your Sharpie and paint that surface so you can tell. You can see it without it, but this just makes it even more visible. Set that right there. You can lubricate your stone if you want. I'm just preventing or trying to avoid a mess on my bench. 3 fingers, distribute the pressure evenly. Light to moderate pressure. You don't have to push down super hard. Let the diamond on the stone do the cutting. And I prefer a diamond stone for this simply because you're being fairly aggressive in a small area. So rather than trying to use a Shapton stone, a ceramic stone, or a water stone, the diamond stone is going to stand up to this and it's going to cut a lot faster. So just move that forward and back. No rush. And have a quick look. All right, so what have we got here? We aren't making contact all the way over to here. We're about 3/8 of an inch away. We are making contact all the way over to there. And all we want is a polished surface that goes edge to edge. So we'll spend a few more seconds on this. It usually doesn't take any more than a minute if it takes that long. Okay, we're all the way over here to the left, and we're 3/16 of an inch away. Now, if you interpret that, in order to get all the way over here, you've got to remove a whole lot of material over on this side in order to catch up. Well, that's just the nature of the beast. Okay, so we've made contact. Actually, depending on the light, I think we're actually all the way over, but for the sake of making sure, I'll spend another 10 seconds on it. Remember, you want that pressure to be as even as possible. Okay, get that in the right light, and I've got contact all the way. Now, depending on how much work you've had to do, you're probably going to raise a burr on the back side. We don't want that, because when this is in place, we want the shaving to come up and slide right up there unimpeded. And with a burr on there, it's just going to cause some issues. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the 1000 grit side. I'm going to set this main bevel right there, flat on the stone, elevate it just a few degrees, and just do a few little circles. Till I can no longer feel that burr. Okay, the burr's gone, but I just transferred it down here. So what I'll do is go back. I'm using the 1000 grit side. You could use the 300. And then flip it over again. Elevate it up a few degrees. Now, you can also just strop it on a piece of wood. This is relatively soft compared to the blade. So moving it forward and back like that, flipping it over, that little burr will eventually break off. There, it's gone. I should not have to touch this again. What I just did is a one-time procedure on your initial break-in. Put the screw back on. Now, if you want to see how to do the blade, we did a video entitled 32 Seconds to Sharpen. It'll walk you through the process of sharpening that blade freehand, and you'll do it better than you can with a jig. We'll leave a link on that down below. Okay, put this together. First thing we're going to do, and I did the blade just like I showed on the video. I'm going to take my chip breaker, put it like this, slip it down, and move it over. Now you have to have enough slack there that you're going to be able to spin that around. And then I like to do it so I have lots of control, holding it like that. Slide it forward, usually to within about a 32nd of an inch of the edge, and then snug that up. Now you want this to be good and tight, because part of the adjustment of the blade takes place on the chip breaker, and it has to pull the blade with it, so you don't want that slipping. All right, next thing we're going to do is set this in place. Now, on the newer planes, the chip breaker almost looks like the short version of the blade. So you want to make sure the blade is actually sitting on the bottom. Carefully put that in there so that you don't bump that sharp edge. You want the back of the blade to sit flat on the face of the frog, so make sure there's no debris on there. This thing called the yoke has to pass through the blade and make it to that horizontal slot in the chip breaker. And this, in this case, this bearing on the end of the lateral adjustment lever fits in this long slot to make your lateral adjustments. So set that in there. Just make sure it's down. Now, you're going to want to adjust this. It usually comes out of the box too tight, and they do that just so it doesn't slide out of place in shipping. Snug that up. Now, I always gauge it by how hard it is to make this adjustment. That's a little bit stiffer than it needs to be. So back that off slightly. That's good. And the nice thing about it is it always brings it back to the exact same spot, so every time you take the blade out to sharpen, you're not having to mess with that. Now I'm going to turn this around, and up against a light colored background, I'm just going to wipe the debris off the bottom. I'm going to advance the blade by turning the adjuster knob until the blade shows up. And the blade is high on my right side, so I'm going to take my lateral adjustment lever and I'm going to squeeze it toward the right side, and that'll cause that blade to swing around. Now it appears to be parallel to the sole, so I'm going to retract it. I'm going to pull it in all the way. But it's under working tension. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to check, see how flat the sole is. Okay, I'm going to check the sole. I'm going to put this in the vise, and I don't want to squeeze it terribly hard. I just kind of want to hold it there. Now I've got a reliable straight edge. I've got a block of wood that I just cut a groove in so that that straight edge will stand up. And I've got feeler gauges that are where? And I've got a feeler gauge, and I'm going to work with 1.5 thou. That's it right there. So what we'll do, make sure there's nothing on the sole. Wipe that one way, by the way. Make sure there's no glue or anything on the bottom of this. Set that on there. Now, take your feeler gauge, and if you put it underneath like this, if you move it and it moves the rule, then it's within 1.5 thou. And I'm going to check it at the toe, right in front of the blade, right behind the blade, and at the heel. And it touches all the way along, so that's good. It doesn't need to be any flatter than that. Now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to check for squareness. So with a reliable square, and you want to check, because sometimes in using this with woodwork you end up getting some glue on there, and that's going to throw you off. So make sure it's nice and clean. Hold that up, referencing off of the sole, and just look and see what you got. And that looks really good. I wouldn't complain about that. I'll check the other side too, although if you're right-handed you only need one side, and if you're left-handed you obviously need the other. And that looks good. And if you're not sure from vision, you can also do the same thing, and that is put that in and then check it with your feeler gauge. Now if I check that, that's out 1.5 thou, but I wouldn't worry about that because I can compensate for 1.5 thou by simply adjusting the blade a little bit to one side or the other. If it was out a lot more than that, then it would have to be fixed, and that may involve a little bit of extra work. Now, final thing I want to tell you about is the adjuster knob, and sometimes folks find that that's very difficult to turn. You can back off the screw that will release some of that tension, but then you don't have that blade held securely. And as you tighten this up, this is going to get even tighter and harder to move. What you can do, I've taken mine before, and with a triangular file, this is brass so it's not hard to cut, just hold that in a vise and go in there and cut a series of slots all the way around the perimeter to give you a little more bite in your fingers. Get your hand plane, spend a little bit of time getting it right, a little wax on the sole just to reduce the friction, and then you can start moving wood the dust-free way. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. Now, I've always said, better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools that we actually manufacture right here, as well as our workshops, both in person and online. Good luck.